There's a story of us, written not in words, but in weapons. It's the story of our own ingenuity, pointed at a single, terrifying goal.
It all begins with the simplest of things, right? A rock, clutched in a hand. The very first time our will became an act of violence.
Then, forged in fire, bronze. This is what gave empires their edge, the very swords that would carve up the entire ancient world.
Then came an age of walls. And, of course, the machines we built to tear them all down. And then a chemical revolution. Just one invention, and suddenly centuries of steel armor and castle walls were basically useless.
Until, finally, we created the power to end everything. This is the evolution of destruction.
All right, let's really get into this. If you go back to the very beginning, a weapon wasn't even really a weapon. It was just an extension of your own body, something you found, not something you made. A rock, maybe a heavy branch. That first violence, it was up close, it was personal, incredibly brutal and direct.
But the first real game changer in killing wasn't about more power. No, it was about distance. Think about it. A sharpened stick, the spear. This was the first weapon we actually made for a purpose. And just like that, you didn't have to be right on top of your enemy or your dinner. You could hunt, you could fight from a much safer place. That's the first huge strategic leap forward right there.
Okay, so the next major jump forward came tens of thousands of years ago. This is when we figured out how to store and release energy, and that led to the bow and arrow. Now, this wasn't just another new weapon, it was a whole new principle of fighting. All of a sudden, brute strength wasn't the only thing that mattered. If you were smaller or slower or even outnumbered, you now had a real chance. Range. That became the ultimate equalizer. And that one idea, it would absolutely dominate warfare for millennia to come.
So, that idea of fighting from a distance, it gets absolutely perfected in the Age of Metal. You see, the Bronze Age didn't really invent brand new ideas. What it did was take the old ones and just amplify them to terrifying new levels. It gave us more than just sharper blades, it gave us the very infrastructure needed to build empires. And believe it or not, the deadliest weapon of this entire era, it wasn't the sword. It was this incredible evolution of the bow. Engineers figured out how to laminate layers of wood, horn, and animal sinew together. The result? A composite bow with way more power than anything that had ever come before it. Now you put that weapon in the hands of an archer on horseback, and you've got a nearly unbeatable combination of speed, distance, and pure destructive power.
If you want to understand the sheer scale of this, just look at the Battle of Kadesh, way back in 1274 BC. We're talking an estimated 5,000 to 6,000 chariots, these light, incredibly fast platforms for those composite bow archers, all clashing on a single battlefield. This wasn't just a fight. This was imperial power projected on an almost industrial scale.
All right, fast forward to the Middle Ages. This whole period becomes a massive arms race, and it's all defined by one thing, the castle wall. Yeah, knights in shining armor get all the glory, but the real story here is the constant back and forth between building stronger forts and building bigger, badder siege engines to smash them to pieces.
But, among all the catapults and trebuchets, there's one weapon that stands out as just uniquely terrifying, and that's Greek fire. This was a Byzantine naval weapon, basically a projected liquid that would just burst into flames on contact. But here's the truly horrifying part. You couldn't put it out with water. In fact, it would literally burn on the surface of the sea. You can just imagine the psychological impact. The fear of this stuff. It was so intense that enemy fleets would sometimes just turn and run at the first sight of the Byzantine ships that could spray it. Think about that. It was a weapon that could win a battle before a single drop was even fired. And that cemented Byzantine naval power for centuries.
And then, everything changed. The great disruptor arrived. Gunpowder. A single invention that made massive stone walls, the finest steel armor, and the skilled knights who had dominated warfare for 1,000 years, suddenly completely obsolete.
The progression was just astonishingly fast. It starts in China with something called the fire lance, which is basically a spear that spits fire and shrapnel. From there, it evolves into these massive European cannons that could literally crack a castle wall from a mile away. And finally, it all shrinks down into the handheld musket. And that was it. The age of the individual, highly trained knight, it was over. The future now belonged to big, centralized governments that could equip and train huge lines of infantry, an idea that would completely redraw the map of the world.
So, up to this point, you gotta remember, weapons technology evolved over centuries, right? But once we hit the 20th century, that timeline just collapses. The pace of development accelerates so ridiculously fast that we stop measuring history in eras and start measuring it in single catastrophic wars.
World War I introduces us to a whole new kind of killing. It's impersonal, it's mechanical, it's industrialized. Just get this. On the Western Front, almost 60% of all British casualties weren't even from bullets. They were from artillery shells, fired by men they'd never see from miles away. The machine gun turned any open ground into a death sentence. Suddenly, war wasn't about courage anymore. It was about math, it was about machinery. And the individual soldier, he just became another cog in this massive, indiscriminate engine of death.
World War II then takes that cold logic and applies it to the entire planet. And it's all driven by this new, horrifying idea that a nation's ability to make war isn't just its army. No, it's its entire industrial base and its civilian population. The line between the soldier at the front and the family at home, it just completely dissolved. Strategic bombing meant factories, ports, and the people, the civilians who worked in them, were now considered legitimate targets. The battlefield was, quite simply, everywhere.
And just to be clear, this is what conventional war had become. Forget nukes for a second. On a single night in March of 1945, American firebombs hit Tokyo, a city built mostly of wood and paper. It created a literal firestorm that killed an estimated 100,000 people in one night. That was the deadliest single air raid in all of history.
And then, just 5 months after that, that grim record was shattered. In 2 blinding flashes of light, the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki took the lives of up to 250,000 people. We, humanity, had finally done it. We'd created a weapon that could wipe an entire city off the map in a single instant.
After Hiroshima, you'd think the world would understand. And it did. But that understanding, that horror, it didn't lead to disarmament. Oh no, it led to the most insane arms race in history, where the only possible endpoint was total global annihilation.
And the leap in scale is just, it's almost impossible to comprehend. So, the bomb that flattened Hiroshima, that was about 15 kilotons. Fast forward to 1961, the Soviet Union tests the Tsar Bomba. Its yield, 50,000 kilotons. We're talking thousands of times more powerful. This thing wasn't a weapon you'd ever use on a battlefield. Its shockwave circled the entire planet 3 times. It was a message. It was a demonstration of a power so immense, it could never, ever be used.
So, from a simple rock clutched in a fist to a power that can literally crack the world in half, the trajectory has been pretty clear, hasn't it? It turns out our deadliest invention wasn't a bomb or a blade, it was always our own ingenuity. And the only real question left is, what are we going to do with it now?